Hi Tom, good morning.
Hey, how you doing?
I hear you well, yes.
Hi, Alberto. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you. Good to be here.
We'll just give people a few minutes to get onto the call.
Sounds good.
Hi, Jinlu. Welcome. Hi, hi. Good to see you. We'll just give everyone a few more minutes to get online, and then we'll start in a couple of minutes' time, if that works. Hey, Anna.
Hi.
Hi, James. Welcome. We're just waiting for a few more people to join the call. Good to see you.
Hello, thank you. Let's see.
So I'll just wait one more minute to see if others are able to join, and then we'll get started. Okay, So perhaps we can get started. I think a couple of others should be joining, but let's go ahead and we can bring them up to speed as we go. So thank you all so much for joining this call. Very excited to have you all here to discuss tropospheric ozone and really inform some of the work that the Clean Air Fund, Clean Air Institute, Clean Air Task Force and Hill are doing this at the moment. Would it be possible, Clean Air Institute team, would you be able to share the slides? And I will just start with a bit of context on the work that we're doing and what we're hoping to get out of this session, and then we can do a round of introductions and then go on from there. Thank you. So yeah, just as a little bit of background to kick us off. So the topic of the call is, of course, tropospheric ozone, and the piece of work that we are leading on is really to think about where this sits in the intersection of welcome, Juana. We're just kicking off, so you haven't missed anything. We'll do introductions in a moment. So yeah, so to give a little bit of background on why the Clean Air Fund and the rest of the team are thinking specifically about tropospheric ozone, there was 3 main points that I wanted to make at the top. So one is that in the last few years, there's been a kind of growing interest from various types of stakeholders in non-CO2 pollutants or so-called super pollutants. So of course, there's been quite a lot of commitments and finance and national action plans specifically towards mitigating methane emissions. At COP28, there was $450 million committed from a group of philanthropic foundations towards super pollutants as a grouping. This month at the CCAC annual meeting, a new organization will be launched, which is called the Super Pollutants Field Catalyst. And then at the last 2 COPs, there's also been these methane and non-CO2 summits, which have been led by the government of the US and the government of China. And as part of this kind of growing movement amongst the CCAC, Clean Air Fund, Global Methane Hubs, many of the calls on this, the organizations on this call, there's many different initiatives across different pollutants, across different sectors. And what we are looking at doing here is kind of trying to better understand and inform some of the foundations that are interested in the topic on where tropospheric ozone sits within this. We have an opportunity to kind of draw climate change and air pollution closer together. And where does tropospheric ozone sit? What are the priority actions? And the second point around that is, historically, tropospheric ozone has been tackled from air quality stakeholders and also often at the subnational level. So one thing we're keen to explore is what entry points there may be and what interest or importance there might be in elevating this as a topic amongst climate stakeholders and also the agricultural sector. And then finally, in lots of places around the world, we see kind of trending down emissions of different air pollutants, different greenhouse gases, or at least starting to. And in many of those places, tropospheric ozone, ground level ozone is remaining kind of like robustly stable or increasing. So kind of projecting forwards into the future as different precursors of tropospheric ozone change, as it stands, it's quite hard to understand the ozone response at different spatial scales. And we think that there are some key evidence gaps that might be inhibiting decision-making, understanding of this that we wanted to dig into. So those 3 points, really, we want to direct the momentum and interest on this topic of super pollutants in the right direction when it comes to tropospheric ozone. And we want to understand what kind of science, policy, implementation work this might lead to. And the focus group that we have today is specifically focused on one component of this. And this is where this intersects with sectoral work and implementation work that might be going on. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So as in terms of an objective for what we're working on here, and welcome Stefania. We're just having an initial introduction before we do a round of introductions. And welcome to Helena as well. So in terms of the objective of the Clean Air Fund and team's project here is to develop a blueprint that essentially sets out what we think could happen over the next few years in terms of different activities that all works towards a better international consensus, better decision-making, and clearer understanding of the role that tropospheric ozone plays in terms of air pollution and greenhouse gases. And this workshop is going to directly inform the blueprint that we are in the process of writing up. Next slide, please. And so for this session specifically, we are hoping to kind of get a variety of people's perspectives on this problem, just to have a really open dialogue on what priority actions you'll see from your different mandates and your different work programs relevant to tropospheric ozone, and then try and break that down in terms of some quite granular and tangible steps that could be taken. And again, the output of this session will kind of directly inform this blueprint, which we hope will inform the strategies of governments, of philanthropic funders, and of other types of finance institutions. And next slide. So the agenda for the next hour or so is as follows. So we will do a brief round of introductions. Now I've kind of given that overview. And then we have a couple of kind of interactive polls and Mentimeters just to start hearing people's perspectives on this problem and beginning to list some priority actions that we might want to further discuss. And then we have a longer period of time to really dig into the details of some of the ideas that come out through that second section. And then we'll wrap it up and try and agree on some very tangible outputs that the Clean Air Fund and team will take on board as we move on to the next phase of the project. And next slide. Great. So yeah, for those that joined whilst I was speaking, welcome to the call. Thank you so much for joining. I was just giving a very brief background on what the work that we're hoping to do here is in the context of what opportunity we think exists around tropospheric ozone and superpollutants. But now let's move on to introductions and hear the kind of wide range of expertise we have on the call. So I'll go first and then I'll pass it on, and please just pass on to somebody else on the call. So my name is Tom Grills. I am leading the superpollutants program at the Clean Air Fund. I'm based in our office in the UK in London. I have a technical background, so I did a PhD and postdoc on modeling of air pollution and short-lived climate pollutants, and then I've been in philanthropy for the last 5 years. And I'll hand over to Alberto.
Thank you, Tom. Good morning, good evening to all of you. Greetings from California. I'm Alberto Ayala. I've been a policy maker here for 25 years. I'm currently the executive director of the Sacramento Metro Air Quality Management District in the capital, California. And I'm also an adjunct faculty at West Virginia University, an mechanical engineer by training. But I've been working on the air quality and climate field here in California for close to 30 years now. So very glad to be here.
And over to you, Juan.
I'll pass it to Xinglu. Sorry.
No problem. My name is Juan Mata. I'm based in Mexico City. I have been working as an international consultant, basically for international organizations, the World Bank, IDB, basically, and lately with the United Nations, UNDP and UNOPS. And I'm mostly specialized on the energy sector, basically energy production, energy storage, and energy end uses, and its linkages to climate, basically on climate mitigation. So I'm very glad to be here, and I would like to give my vision on how to deal with sectorial actions that could contribute to the reduction of tropospheric ozone and its linkages to greenhouse gases emission reductions. Thank you.
Thank you, Juan. Over to you, Jinlu.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Xin Liu from Energy Foundation China, in charge of environmental management program, mainly focus on air quality and the co-management of GHG emission reductions. I used to work for the Beijing Municipal Environmental Protection Bureau for more than 15 years to do the policymaker and planning for air quality improvement, including the Beijing Olympic Games air quality protection plan, etc., and the PM2.5. And currently, my job is to raise funding to do the support the policy development and research on the PM2.5 improvement and the environmental health, as well as the ozone and other super pollutants. But actually, I'm not successfully to raise enough funding for the ozones, these issues, since we just regard it as another precursor, another indicator to improve air quality, but not a super pollutant. So I'm here to learn more from you guys, and maybe we can work together to add it as a new powerful driver for the climate mitigation work. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And over to you, James.
Hello, thanks for the invite. James Bellinger. I lead the air quality team at Arup. So Arup is a engineering and design consultancy. We specialize in the built environment. And so most of my work across the last decade or so has been focused on major infrastructure projects. So hopefully that's where I can provide some input today.
Brilliant, thank you. And I think we might have just lost Stefania for a moment. Helena, if you're able to introduce yourself, please go ahead.
Yes, hello everyone. My camera is stuck, so it's not coming on. But my name is Helena Naber. I'm Senior Environment Specialist in the Global Environment Unit of the World Bank. And I have been working on our global flagship, Accelerating Access to Clean Air, which we should be launching shortly. So it's a pleasure to meet everyone.
Great, thank you so much. And over to you, Stefania.
Hello. I love the order, man first and woman late. Anyway, yeah, we are very sensitive to these things. Sorry to all of you. But anyway, I'm Stefania Bakerli. I work at the World Bank, the Climate Change Group, and I coordinate our methane reduction blueprint that was launched by our president, Ajay Banga, at COP28. I coordinate CH4D, which is the Global Methane Reduction Platform for Development that focus on reducing methane from livestock, rice, waste and sanitation, so waste and agriculture. And I work in partnership, in collaboration with our energy team. They have the Global Flaring Partnership with focus on reduction of methane from energy. So it's a pleasure and a delight. Let me thank you all of you for the invitation. We look forward to work together on this very important topic. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And yeah, I promise that was not intentional. I was following the tiles on my Zoom, but welcome you to call it out. So thank you for that. And we also have a few other colleagues from Clean Air Fund, Clean Air Institute, and Hill on the line. If you guys want to come online and say hello, please feel free to, or just put in the chat to know who else is on the call and helping us with running the session today. And yeah, with that, I think we can get more into the discussion. So if we could share the slides again, please. Thank you very much. Great. So yeah, just to give a little bit more context. So I mentioned some of the context around government interest, what's been happening at the last couple of COPs, and the philanthropic interest recently on superpollutants. Just to go into the context more from a kind of technical and impact side to set the scene for the discussion. So we launched a policy brief at COP29 in Baku on the case for action on tropospheric ozone. And to kind of summarize that, the framing of the policy brief was just to highlight the kind of multiple benefits opportunity from better understanding and managing tropospheric ozone levels. So tropospheric ozone is a greenhouse gas. It's also an air pollutant, and it's also a short-lived climate pollutant. And it's really the only gas or particle that we're emitting into the atmosphere from, well, that is formed in the atmosphere from human activities, which is all three of those things. So as an air pollutant, it contributes to an estimated 500,000 premature deaths per year. So a considerable amount, less at the global scale, a health priority than PM2.5, but very important. And what I always feel those premature death numbers in terms of air pollutions don't show is the kind of day-to-day respiratory health and impact that has on millions of people worldwide breathing elevated levels of ozone. So an important air pollutant, which is above WHO levels in the majority of places worldwide. Secondly, it's when tropospheric ozone interacts with crops and other ecosystems, it affects the ability of plants, the growth of plants in a few ways. And this is linked to as much as 26% of global crop loss. I saw an article that came out yesterday, which was talking about the role of microplastics on global agriculture and food security. And the tropospheric ozone has a similar, if not larger, impact in terms of crops. And not just crops, but also forest productivity. So an estimated 11% loss in forest productivity because of higher levels of ozone at ground level. And then finally, and I think relatively less discussed and spoken about, is tropospheric ozone is a greenhouse gas. So from the latest IPCC report, it has contributed about 0.23 degrees of warming to date. Approximately half of that is attributed to methane-mediated tropospheric ozone. So methane emissions contribute to high levels of ozone. And then the other half of that is because of the emissions of non-methane VOCs, carbon monoxide, NOx. And a kind of complex but important dynamic in terms of ozone is those methane emissions kind of affect tropospheric ozone levels quite globally, as methane is relatively well mixed once it's emitted into the atmosphere. Whereas tropospheric ozone levels driven up by NOx and other pollutants can vary much more at lower spatial scales, so over a city, over a region. And on that regional warming point, there's not a load of scientific literature that looks into regional warming, but there are a couple of papers that indicate that tropospheric ozone might be linked by as much as 0.5 degrees of warming to date in places like South Asia and the Indo-Gangetic Plain, where you have quite high levels of tropospheric ozone. So it's a really important greenhouse gas, but because it is not emitted directly, largely, it's not included in the Kyoto basket of gases, and therefore it's not typically been a major part of the UNFCCC processes in the Paris Agreement. And next slide, please. So to start off with, we wanted to get people's inputs just on a high level question. So I've just mentioned that tropospheric ozone is an air pollutant. It's something that affects agriculture in an adverse way, and reducing it could be positive for agriculture and forestry. And it's also a climate issue, but potentially an overlooked one. And if you would all be able to either go to menti.com and put in that code, or to use the QR code there, we just have a question to ask from the different positions that you're working on, the different perspectives you're coming at this problem, how important or not, or how high impact it is, do you think, to make sure we're fully understanding the role of tropospheric ozone in those 3 buckets. So I think the Menti should lead you to a figure that allows you to try and just roughly, and this is an imperfect science, so feel free to just go with your gut, to roughly map out how much you would prioritize the impact of better managing tropospheric ozone from those different perspectives, and how much effort you think that might take, considering some of the barriers that there might be. So let me know if you're struggling to get onto the right Mentimeter. Perhaps we could put the code into the chat if it's not already. And I'll give you all a couple minutes just to read through those and have a think about where you would like to position those. And then we'll have a quick discussion on this. So we'll give everyone another 30 seconds or so, and just shout if you need a hand getting onto the right link.
Yes, Tom, I cannot access through the.
Okay,
Can you-
so
I
try, I'll put into the chat, if you go to this website,
Okay.
and then it should ask you to put in a code, and then if you just paste in this 8-digit number, you should then be able to see.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Okay, so whilst people are just finishing them, it looks like we have we can start to see some trends in this. So just looking at what we've got so far, it seems that everyone thinks that there is some level of impact that we can get from drawing the link and attention to tropospheric ozone across air pollution, climate mitigation, and agriculture. There is a slight trend for a lower impact when it comes to the climate mitigation side of this, and also a higher effort, and then very similar in terms of agriculture and air pollution. I wondered if anybody that had a kind of significant difference in terms of impact or effort on one of these wanted to just share their thought process in filling this in.
I'm happy to jump in. Slightly high level, I must admit, but I think I went fairly high on the opportunity impact case, as you can probably tell. Everyone has. However, on the effort, did drop it down a few notches, and so I do think there's a lot of potential to build upon things that are already being done. So it was on that basis that I felt that there might be sort of a mid-ground in terms of effort to be achieved. Obviously, things take a bit of effort to pull together in all cases, completely acknowledging that. But on your scale of 1 to 5, kind of went for the middle ground. Happy to discuss. Thought I'd kick it off for you, Tom.
Yeah, I appreciate it. That's really helpful. And just to quickly build on that, did you, from your perspective, do you perceive any like major differences across particularly across the kind of climate change or air pollution side, or did you rank it quite similarly across the options?
Well, for the agricultural section number 3, I actually had that higher effort compared to the other two. And reason for that being, I'm not an expert, but my understanding is a slight lack of additional work going on in that space to some extent, and also lack of evidence potentially. So my perception was potentially great effort needed to pull things together.
Oh, I've lost your audio for a second, James.
Sorry, I was just
Oh, there we
saying,
go.
possibly thinking there might be slightly more effort due to potentially lack of existing evidence and existing work in that space.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Anybody else want to reflect on this? Alberto?
I'll chime in, Tom, and thank you, James. Good comments. You're prompting additional thoughts. So I agree with James with respect to the agricultural and ecosystem sectors, but in contrast, I think when I think about the air quality and health sectors, one of the things that I continually struggle is we already know a lot, and I don't think that we can say that there's a huge scientific gap in terms of what else is needed to take action. And I think you can probably say the same thing about policy. So to me, the challenge is what's missing, right? I mean, what can this effort do? What are the key areas where you can close the gap so that you can take what's already known and all the good lessons that we have from around the world, and then apply it in this context of the co-benefit for climate. So that to me is going to be the ongoing challenge for all of us here.
Thank you. Really appreciate that. Any other thoughts on this before we move on? Okay, so well, this was just an exercise to get us to start to think about the problem. Very useful comments, and I think from our perspective of the work we've done on this, we have recently put out a survey to assess different options and get a kind of wide range of inputs on this. And I think some of the themes from that came out there. I think as you said, Alberto, a lot of the existing work on tropospheric ozone has come from the air pollution perspective, and we understand pretty well the levels of tropospheric ozone and their health impacts, and we're still quite, in many parts of the world, are struggling to deal with that problem. I think the assumption that I had going into the work, this project on the Clean Air Fund side, was that there might be some additionality in getting stakeholders more focused on climate to take up this problem in conjunction with those on air pollution. And this is something that's quite central to integrated action on climate change and air pollution. And I think that assumption still needs to be tested considering the barriers. And what came through there was slightly more effort on the climate side, potentially, and lower potential for impact, which is interesting and perhaps kind of goes to the point of that already a lot of the work that's happening on methane is positive for tropospheric ozone. So the additionality of tropospheric ozone is perhaps something we can get into later on the open discussion. So thanks for filling that one in, and moving on to the next part. So we have organized 3 focus groups, and the way that we've tried to break down this problem is into 3 sections. So the first part of this is thinking about scientific evidence for policymaking. From that side, the discussion we've had and the inputs we've got from different experts was on what evidence or tools are needed to advance how we understand ozone response to different emissions reductions, and where would funding be best placed to fill some of those evidence gaps or develop some of those tools. So that was the first one. The second one, we worked through what entry points there are here. So tropospheric ozone is, as I said, not part of the Kyoto basket of gases and therefore directly discussed through the Paris Agreement. Some countries have have a set standards and targets for tropospheric ozone levels using the WHO guidelines from an air pollution perspective. And there's some regional agreements in different parts of the world around air pollution. And then at the national level, it's quite a mix in terms of whether or not countries have implemented different emissions targets or concentration targets from an air pollution perspective. So that second part of the conversation was really to try to understand what entry points there were to elevate tropospheric ozone and whether or not we should be looking towards climate, air pollution, subnational, national, and global scale. And then finally, and I think potentially the trickiest one is the one that we wanted to discuss in this session, is on implementation. And by that, what we wanted to discuss is what understanding tropospheric ozone response means when we get into the sectors and we get into the reality of implementing large-scale infrastructure projects, on designing policies in government on specific sectors. And the way, if we can just move on to the next slide, the way that, like, obviously from what we've discussed so far, tropospheric ozone is both an air pollutant and a greenhouse gas, and its precursors are emitted alongside many other things. So it's not like this is a unique thing that requires all sorts of new action that we're not thinking about currently. So the way that we've tried to break this down on our side was to kind of think about implementation actions from 3 standpoints. So one is some of the actions we might want to take to tackle tropospheric ozone are things that are complementary to existing efforts. So if things, for example, like electrification of the vehicle fleet, we know that this is good for decarbonization. We also know that this will have benefits on reducing emissions of NOx, which is an ozone precursor. Similarly, with a lot of the work happening on methane, we know that this is important fundamentally from a climate mitigation perspective. And we know that that's also going to help with tropospheric ozone levels. So there's a big basket of solutions here where you could argue that adding the kind of complexity of tropospheric ozone may overcomplicate or not help the narrative, or potentially it's complementary in that it really brings in the health arguments or the agricultural arguments for taking steps on that you might already be taking for climate reasons on methane or CO2. The second bucket that we have tried to set out is where actions might have trade-offs. So things like transitioning more to biomass burning as a solution for decarbonization and CO2, we know will lead to higher emissions of ozone precursors. So whilst it might look good from a CO2 equivalent perspective, it's likely to deteriorate local air pollution and also likely to affect climate through ozone as a greenhouse gas. The other example there that I'll use for now is on the use of hydrogen. If hydrogen is being used in a fuel cell, it's likely to be good for climate and air pollution. Solutions that are looking at hydrogen combustion are likely to lead to elevated levels of tropospheric ozone, but look quite good from a decarbonization perspective. And then the final section is, what are the solutions and sectors that we might not be thinking about at all, because we're not, in many places, we're not really trying to prioritize reducing tropospheric ozone. So the couple of examples we had there in the survey were one around the chemical industry and the use of solvents and emissions of non-methane VOCs from that. And another one was on the aviation sector and the role of NOx emissions from aviation. About 50% of the climate forcing from aviation is because of NOx, which causes tropospheric ozone. But again, that's kind of being overlooked as we're often not accounting for ozone as a greenhouse gas. So this is how we've tried to set it out. And in the blueprint, we are keen to see if we can break down the problem in this way. And I didn't mention before, but I think part of the interest in this topic from the previous US administration and also the bilateral engagement they had with China in these non-CO2 summits was, I think, around that final section. There was some a feeling from the US Special Envoy for Climate team that there are additional bits of climate mitigation that we could get at if we're better understanding tropospheric ozone. And the simplest way to think about that is from the latest IPCC report, that there's a kind of bar there of 0.15 degrees of warming from non-methane VOCs and carbon monoxide, which we're not talking about really from a climate change mitigation perspective. So that's how we've been thinking about the problem, but we wanted to just open it up to the group in terms of the different things that you're working on and where you think tropospheric ozone might be useful to add to that, or where it might be might have kind of trade-offs. If we could just move to the next slide. So we added this as part of the survey, and we've already got some inputs against this kind of complementary, have trade-offs, additional. I won't read through this all for now, but this just provides an example of one of the responses we got through the survey of thinking through this framework. So if you move to the next slide. Yeah, so from the survey, we've collated some views on different sectors and enabling factors for them. And the next slide, please. But yeah, so the question for you all would be, either use the framing that I just described in terms of complementary, trade-offs, additional, and focus in on something that you think would be most important to take a closer look at. Or if that doesn't make sense from the work that you're doing, please just add in where you think tropospheric ozone, where you think more attention on this would be helpful from your perspective, whether that's an evidence gap, whether that's the sector that you're working on and not understanding, accounting for the tropospheric ozone response to that. Please just, go back onto menti.com and spend a few minutes just thinking through from where this gets down into sectors and implementation and policy design, or finance as well, and how finance institutions and programs could think about this, then we will kind of have a quick read through the responses. We'll see if there's any recurring themes, and then we're going to dig into a couple of these. So yeah, this is quite a broad question, I appreciate. So please take your time. I'll give everyone perhaps 5 minutes or so just to have a think about what they want to add. Please give multiple inputs if you have multiple ideas, and then we'll start talking through them. So yeah, I'll kind of go silent for 5 minutes. If you have any questions in the meantime, please just shout, and happy to discuss. But yeah, over to you. Yes.
Stephanie, I just wondering if you want us to spend time writing, or if we could just have a conversation perhaps at the moment now. I know you want to keep the record. It's just that I don't think we have, 15 more minutes to go?
Oh, I think we have, I think we should have 45 more minutes. I think if you're able to stay.
Okay.
But yeah, happy for you to discuss. But yeah, maybe if people can just jot down initial ideas, and then we have the rest of the time basically to discuss this.
Okay.
And yeah, feel free to keep it concise, and we can ask people to elaborate. Okay, so I'll give a couple minutes, take your time, and let me know if you have any other questions, and then we'll discuss. This is great. Thank you. Keep them coming. I'll give one more minute and then we'll open it up for discussion. Okay, thank you. Feel free to keep writing if you were inputting another one. I can see we've already got a lot of different ideas here. And yeah, interestingly, I think covering all bases. So we have things specific to methane mitigation. We have recommendations around air quality management more broadly. And then we also have several actions that relate to the kind of climate process. So NDCs, cleaner vehicles and fuels. And then a couple of them which get at some of the examples that we mentioned on sectors that might be overlooked because of the impact of ozone. I'm just reading the last couple that have come through. So yeah, I think what we were hoping to do is kind of just have an initial discussion on what people were thinking from this, and then potentially to pick a couple of these and talk through what tangibly we could make a recommendation on through the blueprint. And yeah, things like who the key stakeholders might be. But before we go into that, would love to hear from as many of you as possible on what came to mind from the work that you're doing, and how you think this tropospheric ozone links into that. So would anyone like to go first?
I'll jump in. So as you mentioned, Tom, this is a pretty vast collection of ideas. So I think narrowing down into something that is workable is going to be key here. But I wanted to react to something you said earlier, and that is it is true in the transport sector. We know that electrification is going to be ultimately a good solution. But we cannot forget that there are still many barriers remaining to electrification. So we need to be mindful that barriers like high cost, lack of infrastructure, even lack of energy capacity are going to be challenges in many jurisdictions. So we have to make sure that we provide solutions that are tailored and fit different jurisdictions in terms of their economies. There are a lot of actions that we could be promoting that are much more financially feasible for many jurisdictions. So let's make sure that we don't fall into the temptation of thinking, okay, yeah, electric vehicles are going to be the panacea solution for everything, because that sends the wrong message, right? That means if a jurisdiction cannot afford them, then what is there for me to do? So That was one of the comments that I wanted to add to in reaction to a point you made earlier.
Thank you.
And I would love to complement what Alberto has said. And let me just give an overview of what we are doing at the bank, if you allow me. The way we are approaching methane reduction is, without any question, as a climate crisis. But given that we work in the southern part of the world, that's very important. We are not working in the northern. We work on developing countries. Our priority is linking that narrative to development. And that's, I put that, keep the narrative simple. I think this is something extremely important for us. No matter, I believe, from wherever we come from, is to make the narrative very simple. Because and that one question I have to you, Ton, is the tone of the blueprint. For us, the tone of the methane reduction blueprint for the World Bank is of emergency, is urgency. And I think that's the first thing. Urgency then means that we don't have much time to, and I want to go back to another point that Alberto mentioned about the studies and all the discussions. Action is absolutely necessary. So I think one point I would like to raise is complementing again what has been said. I believe so. From where I sit, we are a development bank. We are working at the moment in 24 countries. Is about $12 billion we are leveraging in action going to methane reduction in rice agriculture. But please don't quote this number. It's just among friends here. But what we see is keep the narrative simple. Don't dilute the importance. I also put here, place trade-offs upfront. For instance, the first thing we did on methane was to disaggregate our GHG accounting within the World Bank. We were looking exclusively at CO2, although we were looking at the other pollutants. But the first thing we did is we need to name each gas. We need to name CO2, we need to name methane, we need to name nitrous oxide, and there are many others when you start working, as you said. So I think the trade-offs, Don and colleagues, is something we cannot play with. In rice, even I was looking at the document you said, when you say, okay, let's improve the water irrigation. When you decrease the amount of water in the field, you know that in a paddy, you increase the amount of nitrous oxide. So there is a quantity of water that still needs to remain, so otherwise you can get this very potent pollutant out. So there are many things that I think we cannot, are unnegotiable. The trade-offs, in my opinion, working on methane are unnegotiable. We need to keep them intact. We need to bring them up front in our discussions on solutions. But I think we need to keep the narrative simple. I put that one on livestock, for instance. Which is the major source of methane in the world. The way we are addressing it, because livestock is more than a critical economic activity for countries, it's a cultural activity. If you go to Africa, it's cultural, right? So we keep it on the basics. Let's talk about animal health. So I think, Ton, and I want to go back to your three key points. Sorry for talking so much, but just to finish here on your three key work streams, I would really place implementation as the priority. Being supported and informed by policies and by regulations and by all these discussions, which is fundamental science and technical discussions. But I think, in my view, for this super important subject to really get into the NDCs and policymaking, we need to focus on implementation, focus on the solution. And Alberto, you touch upon something very important, which is the affordability of solutions. The technologies may be out there, but they are still not accessible. It's still not affordable to the great majority of countries that need to implement them. And I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefania. And just one quick follow-up before we move on from those 2 points. Yeah, really great points on urgency and on methane. I just wondered, in terms of keeping the narrative simple and the work you're doing on methane, to what extent have you integrated the messaging on the health benefits and the agricultural benefits of cutting methane because of tropospheric ozone? Has that played into the work so far?
Absolutely. The data, the information you are saying, for instance, 26% of loss of staple crops, it's all in our narrative. We are not talking about methane is in our jargon here and with our clients, we are not talking about we don't even talk about methane mitigation. That's what I'm saying. We are talking about development. We are saying, look at the quality of your soil. Look at your crops. Right? You are having, rather than having flooding every 3 months, you are having flooding every 3 days. So we are really keeping the narrative to something that's extremely accessible to people. They understand, from policymakers to farmers and city dwellers, they understand what we are saying. So that's what I mean. But we are using all the scientific background, the data, to show some statistics and say, oh, in this part, have you noticed that this amount of crops are not, you have impacts on the job, which is directly linked, but we are not using the scientific language. We use when there is a audience for that, but it's absolutely necessary, this information, and we are drawing and using it at its maximum. Let me say, we are stretching it to its max to get some action done, and the responses are being amazing.
Brilliant, thank you, very useful. And would anyone else like to, share some of their thoughts and what they added on as implementation ideas?
Happy to, if it's like a brief one. I noted aviation at the top. Been working a lot on some fairly hefty airport expansion projects recently. That doesn't sound like I'm a great person to help the environment when I say that, but equally, it's good to be involved in those so that you can hopefully implement some kind of change. Alberto's laughing. But I did identify that there's definitely a gap there in terms of assessment of their impact. There's a gap in terms of policy, but there's also that actual numerical quantification piece that's missing when you look at expansion projects for aviation or other major infrastructure types as well. So something to think about really as much as anything else.
Thank you. And Juan, Jinlu, Helena, anything else to add?
Yes, so I put on the importance of air quality monitoring because, and also the building the capacity for air quality management, and also the approach for a coherent approach that takes into account both climate change objectives, but also air quality, but also air quality, because then it would to have a more coherent approach, as I think you all have mentioned, there are synergies and then there are trade-offs, and it would be important to acknowledge these early on to be able to manage those where there are divergent impacts from them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I also want to add several points. I think based on China's experience, actually, China paid much attention on the air quality improvement and achieved a significant progress on PM2.5, which for the PM2.5 concentration has decreased by more than 60%. But at the same time, ozone is still at a very high level of the concentration, or even rebound in the past 5 years. So basically, the government failed on this issue. Actually, they want to implement like ozone attainment plan, but as we know, ozone doesn't have like a annual concentration limit, even for WHO's guideline. So my suggestion, or whether we can give some scientific evidence or some feasible solutions to the government to improve their confidence, like China or other countries which want to or pay much attention on the ozone issues. And first, I think a lot of scientists still argue whether improve ozone need to reduce more NOx or reduce more VOCs, since there's some very complicated nonlinear the reaction mechanism behind the ozone. I think most of the air quality scientists regard VOC as a more important precursor. But from the climate side, if we want to talk more about the co-benefits of the energy transition, maybe the NOx or the fossil fuel burning, to reduce fossil fuel burning, could be more feasible or effective ways to tackle ozone. I think from the implementation side, probably the Chinese government, why we pay much attention on the VOC emission reduction, but neglect the NOx. Actually, the NOx is very related to the fossil fuel burning and the energy transition and the climate benefits. So whether we have a very let's say on the ground or very scientific science-based ozone source apportionment and to set a better target and to focus more on the NOx or the oil and the gas cap or the consumption reductions, something like that. I think maybe we can successfully achieve the ozone emission reductions. I think this is the lesson learned from Chinese side. Yeah. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
And
I think-
Juan?
Yes, just to complement to what has been already said, I think it is very important to tackle some key areas and sectorial areas in the urban sectors, which I mean, beyond the electrification of the mobility, I think there are important areas of opportunity of reducing methane emissions. And this is something that is a common problem in major urban areas in developing world, especially in Latin America, is how to make the transition of the use of natural gas and the use of LPG in buildings, especially for water heating and also for cooking, to move from the use of natural gas to electrification. This is a major challenge. The technologies are already there. They are mature. Solar thermal water heating is mature. It's cost effective. And also the distribution of solar PV panels is also a mature technology. The problem here is how to implement. And this has to do with how to tackle policies from national to the local jurisdictions, and how to bring finance, and also to improve the how do you say, some fiscal incentives or economic incentives to move forward on that. And this is something that is not easy because sometimes there's no good coordination between local jurisdiction governments and the national governments. The national government want to move forward, but the local governments have still financial barriers, policy barriers, and political will sometimes. Another area of opportunity in urban areas is how to move forward the capture of biogas in the municipal waste facilities and be able to use it productively for energy. And this is something that is also part of the jurisdictional efforts. And there must be also incentives and also good financial structures and good financial, how do you say, financial mechanisms.
Thank you so much. Okay, so we've got a lot of rich areas that we could dig into. Just to try and play it back and begin to zoom in on a couple of things. I think there's a lot of barriers there in terms of social, economic, governance, structural ones, which I think are probably too bigger questions for us to fully iron out in the next 20 minutes. But I did hear a couple of themes there. So, I mean, tropospheric ozone, I feel like, is one of the main challenges is the complexity of it. But I think Stefania's point on the having a clear narrative and applying that on at least where there are sectoral initiatives, solutions, finance mechanisms, which we know can benefit tropospheric ozone, I think is an interesting area to explore. So I'd be keen to hear more and discuss more the extent to which better accounting for or communicating the benefits of reducing tropospheric ozone on health, on crops, on forests could be built into some of these existing initiatives, which are already happening without really us prioritizing tropospheric ozone. And maybe we could start with that. And then if we have time, I think the second thing I heard is for some of the other solutions, it's going to be really hard to give that clear, simple narrative because there is still so much uncertainty over which precursor pollutant is most important to tackle, be it NOx, be it VOCs, and the experience in China and other places at that more local scale. And so in that one, there was a couple of mentions of the transport sector here. So I'd be interested to explore how we think on making sure we understand like the near-term climate effects of transport interventions, not just electrification, but also scrappage and emission standards, etc. And where perhaps for that one, it's not just tropospheric ozone, but also black carbon and other short-lived climate pollutants could add to sectoral initiatives. Does that sound like a fair representation of the ideas that we had here that we could dig into? Great. So yeah, perhaps Stefania, we could just dig a little bit more into. You mentioned the communication you've done on your methane work. I'd be interested to know specifically if the bank has been able to quantify or comment on the tropospheric ozone benefits for agriculture. You mentioned a couple of other things around how the solutions themselves can benefit farmers, but have the extent to which you thought about that this is actually good for crop productivity and yield loss? Would be keen to just hear a bit more.
We are not quantifying tropospheric ozone. We are not there yet. And I have to say, for those of us in the methane community, methane is a very new gas, right? CO2 has been there for a long time. So it's not that. So getting people to understand methane, which necessarily leads to nitrous oxide and then black carbon and then go, right? Ammonia, and you name all of them, is being our main priority now. So this discussion on bringing in the tropospheric ozone is really critical. We love it, but we are not quantifying this. So we look forward to work with you to get this done properly, all of you. But that's one. But before I say anything on our portfolio, two points I would like to mention based on what has been mentioned. I would like to emphasize one point on incentives. And within that point of incentives, also to look at the disincentives. One thing that we do at the bank, we are working quite pushing a lot, is repurposing of policies. There is a lot of money out there, and money is something that is complete. There is no money there out there. The climate is at attack. We are in a very, very difficult political situation, and this is a big elephant in the room. We needed to bring that up. Climate is shrinking the funding for climate more and more. But anyway, the money, there is money there on very perverse, we say, policies and incentives. So on one thing we believe, at least the bank, we are pushing a lot, is for countries to rethink their own policies, where they are putting the money. Agriculture is one of them. The kind of subsidies that are going to places we don't want to see in agriculture is big. So this is an area that I think, going back to one point on incentives, also think combine it with the disincentives, where we have to do more, but where we have to really downscale to make sure that we can free up, we can change things and support the good initiatives. For instance, organic architecture or agriculture gets 10% of subsidies that the non-organic, the highly polluting agriculture gets with fertilizers and everything. So this is a very important area. Here in the bank, just to go back very briefly, the way we have framed our methane agenda is around what we call the triple wins. And we have, of course, the near-term reduction of methane and all the benefits that come with that, and including the fact of putting us ideally on track of Paris Agreement, which we have never been as humanity. We have failed and we keep failing. So one is the near-term, which is one. But the other two triple wins are really what exciting our clients. And one of them is enhanced livelihoods, which is the economics. So making sure that the farmers, they decrease the production costs by adopting low methane, which is climate smart practices, basic ones. So it's reducing production costs and increasing yields and income. That's a very powerful thing we say. And the second one is enhancing environmental resilience. And goes back to that point that we drive from your kind of data, saying, you know, we can increase the quality of the soils. We can make sure that water is not scarce. And we are dealing with all the components of productions that are there, and looking also at decreasing the pollution, which is what we call the third system in the system. So we are working based on the triple wins, on the narrative. But again, tropospheric ozone is not explicitly mentioned. We have in our text, we say it's a precursor of that, but we are not measuring. We need your help to get this done properly.
Brilliant, thank you. I saw James put his hand up, so over to you, James.
Thank you. Yes, it was just to follow up on that, really, and build upon it. I mean, that was obviously a massively complex area and a very kind of, well summarized point. And I love the, description of the triple wins there. But what occurred to me as you were talking was the opportunity to do that for other sectors, and building on what you were saying earlier, Tom, thinking of some ideas that you could then implement. There would be potentially some opportunities around, the short-term wins and playbook, roadmap, whatever you want to call it, on a sectoral basis rather than just a pollutant basis. So thinking of projects we're working on or have been looking at not that long ago for the textile industry, they've got a massive supply chain, loads of impacts, pollutants that would relate to this topic. So there's plenty of things they can be doing. It's a global issue for that industry in particular. So yeah, just thinking about that as being something you could implement.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, and also like the 3 points that Stefania made, and I think an interesting reflection for me there is those points can work around methane, but also this wider whatever we want to call it, super pollutants, non-CO2 short-lived climate pollutants. And I think for tropospheric ozone, when it comes to a simple narrative, I think it's going to fit most at home with those other pollutants. Not as it's like I don't think it's ever going to become. We could never see a movement like we've seen on methane around tropospheric ozone. What we're trying to understand is that value add it brings in terms of benefits. And from the Clean Air Fund side, we're also doing a program on black carbon. And to those points, that's similar how we're thinking about our super pollutants work is it's that near term, that fast climate mitigation argument that has really pushed forwards momentum on methane, but is going to run into a barrier of the global climate process and some of the geopolitics at the moment. And when it comes to tropospheric ozone, black carbon, and some of these other pollutants, these more local messages around how it affects people's lives, how it affects people's health from breathing it, agriculture, etc., and how it affects kind of airshed between countries we think is becoming increasingly important. So yeah, and Juan, your hand is up.
Yes, I mean, just to give you an example of what's happening with incentives and disincentives to fossil fuel use in Mexico. For example, the carbon tax at national level in Mexico includes a tax to all the fossil fuels except natural gas, because natural gas is considered a clean fossil fuel. So in terms of environmental policy in Mexico, natural gas is not taxed for carbon emissions. So it is at some point in many sectors is still incentivized the use of it. So which is something that should be reconsidered in Mexico, because I mean the use of natural gas promotes tropospheric ozone in the cities, and this is something that should be reconsidered in the near future. And also, for example, there are other issues in Mexico and most probably in other areas of the world. Since natural gas is considered a clean fossil fuel, power generation, when it is moving from more dirty fossil fuels like coal or diesel or bunker fuel to natural gas. But power production with natural gas has to include some regulations to demand the use of NOx reduction in the end of pipe with catalytic converters. And this is something that in many countries is still not enforced. Mexico is one of the places where it is not enforced, and power generation with very efficient combined cycle plants still produce a lot of NOxes. And this is also a precursor of tropospheric ozone. Just a comment on that.
Thank you. Alberto?
A lot of great comments. Juan prompted a thought. It would be interesting to create a timeline in terms of where we see power production going into the future, because to Juan's point, as you know, in the States, we've been implementing NOx control and turbines for many years, and we're already envisioning co-firing with hydrogen to lower the carbon footprint. So, I mean, just presenting a clear picture of where things are going would be a good thing for this effort. But I wanted to go back and make a point about transport, because you teed it up, Tom. And to Xinlu's point about the controversy, the uncertainty about reducing NOx versus VOCs. I mean, Stefania said it well. Let's keep it simple. You need to reduce both, because when you think of transport, if you tackle one, you're going to tackle the other. So that's the first message. The second message is, when I look around the world, in many when we talk about ozone, it is very likely an urban problem, right? We think of ozone as urban air pollution. So these are all tied together. And when we start thinking about this implementation aspect in terms of sectors, again, I think there's a lot of very good lessons from around the world that you can draw from that you can begin to share with these places where they want to take action.
Juan, can I compliment here what Alberto is saying? I think what he said is I fully agree with the distinction. I think it's important to do to differentiate, because countries are in different stages at various levels, right? So if you look at Africa, for instance, it's not an urban issue. It's still a rural issue in many places. Of course, you have Nigeria, you have South Africa, but it's essentially still a very rural problem. With the cities, they are urbanizing at an insane speed. But I think what you're saying, for instance, on motorcycles, this is an Asia issue as well. Urban, as you said, is an urban Latin American, urban Asian. So there are cross-regional things, but they have some regional distinction. Also, North and South is different. Perhaps if you want to talk about complexity, then let's talk about complexity. Then you have the developed world, and you have the developing countries, and you have the very low-income countries. You have countries in conflict. So there is certain distinction that you may want, some nuances that you may want to bring it there when look at not only sectors, but kind of a matrix, how these sectors may operate. For instance, we are discussing on biogas with India, and India wants to learn from Brazil. Two giants, perfect. So we are bridging that. We are helping them to learn from each other, sitting on the back and let them talking to each other because they understand. We are, Xinliu, we are supporting China in its control pollution policy. Our portfolio of projects are informing China. Absolutely outstanding initiative in having a control policy in terms of pollution. We have soil pollution. We have all kinds of projects supporting what. So I just want to bring this nuance that I think is important to differentiate. And I fully agree, Alberto, with your point of before going into the complexities, let's keep it simple. One thing that resonates with every single government in the world is jobs. And Alberto, you just gave an example of a series of wonderful jobs. And that's something also we talk about. This is a priority now for the bank. Our president has centered jobs as critical for us to support in the world. So how to link this very complex and invisible thematic, right, to something as simple as creating a new series of jobs for the youth, which are coming out of universities jobless. And now we have all the numbers. We are happy to share with you on that. But I go back to my point of keeping the narrative simple and accessible. And I think, Alberto, you really, and also Juan mentioned in Mexico, right? Something as simple, changing an existing tax and make sure that there is an additional element in there. So I just want to highlight these 2 points. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. So we just have 5 minutes now. So does anyone else have any final comments to add before I try to wrap this up? Specifically in terms of what opportunities there are with this to keep it simple, add a new narrative to a more complex conversation and add a fresh perspective, or on the flip side of the need to do some of this science work and disentangle some of the complexity of this. Helena.
Yes, one thing I think we haven't really touched on, and I think you have it in the paper that you mentioned in the note, on the wildfires and the importance of climate change adaptation and resilience in reducing those, so the natural aspect and reducing the potential for tropospheric ozone from wildfires through basically climate adaptation. I think that's something that hasn't been mentioned, would be important to keep in mind. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, can fully agree on the non-CO2 side of wildfires is something that I think, needs a lot more attention. Xinliu?
Yeah, just one more comment or suggestion that since we propose the ozone issue, tropical ozone issue, and that's because we believe maybe ozone is more easier to solve compared to the carbon neutrality or climate change. So that can be a driver to achieve the triple or multiple benefits. But I'm not sure whether any country or any region in the world has already successfully solved ozone. In my opinion, I think ozone is much harder than difficult than PM2.5. Maybe the same difficult level as the carbon neutrality. So we'd better prepare some successful cases, let the founders know that we already have on the ground the successful cases that we can already achieve the triple wings, et cetera, et cetera. Otherwise, this is just some modeling work, not the on the ground, the real one. Yeah. I think since China tried all the best to tackle air pollution, but achieved the how to say the object the result. So I think I'm not sure. California, Alberto, you already solved ozone. I'm not sure, or other countries. So I think this is very important. Yeah.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think one thing we learned through the policy brief part of this project where we were writing that is just how difficult it was to get those good case studies. There definitely at the city level are some interesting analysis. So Mexico City, Los Angeles, we had something on Beijing, and then the wider in Europe, there is more of a kind of transboundary agreement. So we had some case studies, but it was really hard to then link that to the climate benefits. So there's big evidence gaps there that need to be filled. And yeah, thank you very much. So yeah, just to wrap this up, thank you all so much for your time. I think coming at a problem from a specific pollutant perspective can sometimes always feel slightly strange because obviously these are multi-sectoral, multi-pollutant problems. But I think we've seen with methane that it is an interesting avenue, particularly in terms of messaging, funder interest, thinking about the impacts in a tangible way by looking at these pollutants. And that's where we've come at this from. And just to try and wrap up some of the main insights from that discussion, I think this is complex. So let's break it down in two ways. There's the short term. What can we really add by keeping it simple? We know that the super pollutants narrative has legs from the success of methane. We can communicate about fast climate mitigation. This is what led the US previously and China to be really interested in this topic. And we can apply not just that fast climate mitigation angle, but the enhanced livelihoods, the health benefit side alongside it. And one of the advantages, I think, of the super pollutants framing is it's able to do that without some of the baggage that you have when you just think about air pollution or just think about greenhouse gases and climate. It's quite a careful selection of pollutants that allow you to talk about those multiple benefits. So whether it comes to agricultural methane policy, waste methane, transport sector, aviation, it's complicated, but there is a story for us to tell on tropospheric ozone, and understanding tropospheric ozone response might open up some other doors that 100-year warming CO2 doesn't, or even PM2.5 is more in conflict. And then in the long term, all of this needs to be supported with those other pillars that I mentioned, the other focus groups that we've been had. So on the science side, definitely more modeling is needed. I think the case study in China and elsewhere shows that it is something that needs atmospheric chemistry modeling expertise once you get to that point. And that is ultimately what can inform some of the optimization at this at kind of smaller scales. And then alongside that, we can update you all once we have written this up in terms of the entry points we saw within the UNFCCC, within different regions and international agreements in different regions and NDCs, etc. So yeah, thank you so much again. It was amazing to have such a vast array of expertise and different regions and different sectors covered. And yeah, we will keep you posted as all this comes together. And if you have any questions, any follow-ups, please don't hesitate to get in touch with me. And thanks to also to Juan Felipe, Anna, Monica, and everyone else that's been helping on this call. And yeah, hope to see you all soon. And thanks again.
Thanks very
Bye-bye.
much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye.
You all.
you.
Bye bye.